And so what I've tried to do, though, is I want to repair what I think is wrong with libertarianism, so that we can return to our position as the thought leadership of the conservatives, because they have numbers and we don't have numbers. So to do that requires a rigorous argument. Hans puts together rigorous arguments. An awful lot of libertarian arguments, certainly all conservative arguments, are moralistic, moralizing, but they're not rigorous. And so my goal is to try to put a rigorous argument together. And my point is, which I mentioned to you earlier, that we as libertarians don't get to choose what level of ethical and moral suppression is going to be embodied in the law. We don't get to make that up ourselves and draw a line in the sand and say this is what's right. And the reason is that there is a necessity out of human nature to suppress immoral and unethical actions, criminal, unethical, and immoral actions, to a level that people will not demand a state. So we can't tell people you can't demand a state if the state is imposing their moral and ethical limitations. So on the other hand, you can say to people, well, what's the minimum criminal, ethical, and moral suppression, enforcement we need? What do we have to put in the common law in order for people to form a rational, voluntary society? And I think this is pretty obvious from the evidence, is that people have rejected what we call the Rothbardian argument, or the aggression axiom, or what Jeff Tucker is now calling the brutalist argument. Because while that may be a necessary level of enforcement under the common law, it's an insufficient level of enforcement under the common law. It's insufficient because people won't rationally join a polity where rampant, unethical, and immoral behavior can be easily conducted. And the reason is because it's too high transaction costs. It puts this huge transaction costs on economic, personal activity. Now, you can use a Rothbardian brutalist ethic with the nation next door, because you don't have to live with them, right? You don't have to interact with them every day. But you can't choose to sort of use an international ethics with people that are your neighbors. You can wish you could, you can. But in fact, brutalism, Rothbardianism, the non-aggression principle, if we refer to property, we define property as intersubjectively verifiable, which is a technical term, which means that we can see it, both of us. If we're only to suppress that level, that means we're licensing, we're actually saying you can, not only can you only enforce criminal behavior that violates non-aggression, but you can't enforce unethical and immoral behavior, right? You can't suppress it by law. So what's happening is you've now licensed unethical and immoral behavior. Now, well, you're not going to get people, the average person on the street, to other than intuit something's wrong with this, with Rothbardian ethics. But the fact is, there's something wrong with it, and we can empirically tell that because now we can measure all this stuff about people. We can see that, well, they don't like Rothbardian ethics. They want classic liberal ethics. That's what they want. They don't like. They don't want to live in a society where they have to be worried about the fact that they're being taken advantage of. Do you want me to continue one more line on this?
Sure.
So, and the reason is this: is that we're libertarians. We tend to be geeks, and we also tend to be the autistic end of the spectrum. All right. So we tend to be very bright. Libertarians are bright. Well, we have a smart people disease, and that is that it's easy for libertarians to understand incentives and to deduce incentives from any conversation. We don't sort of rely on emotions to tell us this stuff. We just deduce incentives. So we have this wonderful rationalist view of the world, and we actually, turns out, we're incredibly good at uncovering deception, fraud, and that other stuff. So what happens is we discount the difficulty that it comes from identifying unethical and immoral actions. We discount it a lot, whereas the rest of humanity doesn't. They live in a world where they actually depend on each other to tell you, is that guy telling me the truth or not? They don't make independent decisions we do. So we kind of beat up on the left for this dependence on each other, as if they can't think, when the fact is, well, they're actually just worse at it than we are, right? And so we're really good at this particular thing, and then we assume the world operates by this gravity. And the truth is, we're wrong. Right? You can't just say to people, well, just because we're really good at identifying when people are committing illegal and immoral and unethical actions, and then we can walk away, but you who can't identify them have to be the victim of them. And so you're not going to get people, you're not going to get enough people. You might get a little handful of people to get in a libertarian society and license unethical and immoral behavior, but you're not going to get a polity together to do this with any sufficient size. I'm going to flip it around and say the only people that there's a couple groups of people on the planet who do practice Rothbardian level ethics, which is in group they're still high trust, but out group they're parasitic. Where they tend to be unethical and immoral as a strategy. Gypsies. And what do you do to gypsies? Well, you got to get rid of them, and if you could exterminate them, you actually do, because people have. Right? So what's going to happen if you get a Rothbardian libertarian group together on some island somewhere, is that everybody's going to try to exterminate you because you're going to have too many unethical and immoral actions and too high trust violations. So the point is, we don't get to choose what level of property rights that there has to be enforceable under common law. We don't get to arbitrarily make that. And what we get to do is an empirical test of saying, what is the minimum amount of enforcement necessary for people to join a voluntary polity? And I think what you'll find is that we'll find, and I'm going to try to fund a little bit of research on this over the next couple of years, is that I think you're going to find that the classical liberal level of suppression is going to be the minimum amount of legal enforcement in order to create a libertarian society. And I want this to be clear because the issue is government, not morals and ethics. Right? If you tell me we get rid of the parasitism of government and we can replace all those institutions with competing ones, right? We have left as a moral and ethical society. Well, I mean, I'm sorry if most human beings want it to be moral and ethical, right? But if we have a moral and ethical, and you can't be as easily, this is the point, you can't be a libertine in this libertarian society. I'm sorry, suppressing libertinism, unethical and immoral action, is probably a pretty good price for eliminating all demand for the state. So my goal is, I say we need to eliminate demand for the state. My suspicion is, in order to eliminate demand for the state, libertinism is going to be a little bit suppressed, right? And so I think that's going to be the right level of libertarianism. So I want to change the argument from one of what's morally right and just, which is a bunch of unempirical nonsense, to what is the minimum level of suppression of involuntary transfer, imposition of costs, whatever you want to say. What is the minimum level of that's necessary for a formation of a voluntary polity that does not have any demand for an authoritarian state?
And draw up a constitution around that.
Yeah, it's actually really easy. You know, we beat up our ancestors, for not being particularly, perfect, but I mean, they did a pretty good job of, preserving their rights as an Englishman. If we hadn't had the Civil War, if they just split up the country at that point, we might have had two constitutions that could have competed, that would have preserved our rights as Englishmen, or Anglo-Saxons. And at this point, it's probably just time to create a new constitution that restores our rights as Englishmen or as Anglo-Saxons, to get back to the common law without the government.
Did you get involved with John Hospers? John Hospers, he was really the libertarian candidate back in the US about 1972, and he wrote a book called, I think, The New Constitution for a New Country, and he was drawing up constitutions for newly emerging countries like Vanuatu and things like that. I think there was a group out of the US that also started Minerva, the little island near Tonga, where it was just some rocks appearing, and they took some concrete out and some chicken wire, and they built a little island. They proclaimed that as
Yes,
a nation
yes.
state. And I remember buying some silver coins that they minted to
Well,
fund their
the problem
original
is
constitution.
this.
But there's some very interesting stuff on those new constitutions.
Well, I'll look at it. The truth is, I tend to read everything, not just libertarian.
Yeah.
And this is one of the problems that libertarians I find is they tend to be heavily selection biased. So I tend to read pretty much everything, and it just turns out the libertarians are right about a lot of things. They're right about economics. They're right about the common law. And they're right about the results of living under liberty. What we're not right about, because we're still carrying the error of the Enlightenment around with us, is that we're equal in interest and ability. And I think the problem is that conservatives are right on it. Conservatives are right that the Durkheimian view of the world, which is, it's pretty hard to tame a bunch of hyper predators, which is what we are, the world's greatest super predator, to train those creatures to cooperate together. And you need a whole lot of signals and enforcement and suppressors all around us to take that super predator instead of we wiped out our predecessing competitors, our Cro-Magnons. We wiped them all out, right? Neanderthals. We probably ate them, I don't know. They probably chased it like chicken or something. I guess probably be funny, but we're great super predator. We have to. The Durkheimian world says that it's actually really hard to make people do that, and I think the evidence supports it. And so I think the libertarians are wrong in this benevolent view of natural man, and the conservatives are right. Now the conservatives don't have a rational language, so we've got economics, we've got law. We've got the liberty creates prosperity, prosperity creates choice, and we have got a rational language. Conservatives have a lock on morals. They understand it better than we do. That's why they win elections and we don't. And so what I want to try to do is I want to try to convert all of that into libertarian language, so that we can talk to the conservatives and say, I know this is how you talk about this thing, but you realize it's really close to talking about magic, right? And so we need to change your magic into something rational. Well, they're going to fight that because they're moral intuitionists, right? They feel morality and they think it's intrinsic, right? They don't realize that they've been the victims of all that 4,000 years of training that's built up over traditions. So we have to, but they're right fundamentally on the nature of man.
Well, Curt, you've defined the problem, and people like you and I have got about this remaining task is to clearly define it and put it into a one-pager.
Well, I've got it down to about 20,000 words. Hopefully, I'll get my. I've been promising my book out for 2 years now, but every time I make a draft of it, I realize, I got this part wrong. And so I think that I'm pretty close now, and I think that over the next couple of years I'll be able to put that together in a rational language that we can talk about all politics.
Good, so we can watch for this book. Have you got a title for it?
Propertarianism.
Propertarianism.
Yeah, I call it. I'm riffing off of Ricardo Duchesne's work. It looks like Duchesne when you read it, but Duchesne, which is the Aristocratic Egalitarianism. And I think that Propertarianism is a sort of method. It's a logical method for all political systems. And then I think Aristocratic Egalitarianism is probably the term we're going to use going forward, or aristocratic liberty is the term we'll go forward with when we're talking about what the future of libertarianism looks like.
Wonderful. You've given us something to look forward to.
Thank you, my friend.
Thanks
Appreciate
so much.
it.
Okay.